Welcome to the Cycling in Alignment podcast, an examination of cycling as a practice and dialogue about the integration of sport in right relationship to your life.
Greetings and salutations, Space Monkeys. Before we begin our episode, a brief reminder that this podcast depends on support from the audience. The reason I am able to continue with this project is because of the support of patrons. If you are a member of my audience and you feel I have offered you insight or added value to your cycling journey, please consider a visit to my website, colbypierce.com, where you can make a contribution to the Cycling in Alignment podcast. You can support the show for as little as $8 for a one-time contribution, or choose to subscribe as an ongoing member. Thank you for your consideration. Here's your reminder to think critically, act intuitively, and pedal consciously.
Nathan, what's up, my brother?
All is good.
Steamboat.
All is good. We are
here for Steamboat.
we did this podcast, same kind of situation 3 years ago, when I did my first ever Steamboat. We drove up from Boulder, and we were like, "Hey, we're having a really intellectual conversation," or at least we thought we were. Pretty up our own butts, but it's like, "Hey, you make me sound smart."
You make me sound smart.
Well, we should record this.
We should record this and call it a podcast.
So anyway, the experiment went well. It was actually a great podcast last time, and I thought we should sit down and just see if that wasn't by chance or luck. See if we've grown some new ideas since then, or
if it's the same old recycled garbage.
So here we are in a car. I was expecting a really smooth, beautiful drive, and we are in like block-to-block traffic. It's like 3 lanes wide.
Yes, we're in a parking lot.
Doesn't seem to be getting any better.
Thanks, construction. All these lanes are closed, and as you can see clearly, they're occupied with huge pieces of equipment that would make it impossible to drive there. There's a slight tone of sarcasm in my voice. It's just like
these traffic cones are really.
There's an ocean of concrete next to us. Yeah. Actually, traffic cones are dangerous. I mean, have you ever been in a race with traffic cones? I actually tell people, guys, go around the cone, and often they'll just run into it anyway. It's like they're not even listening to me. It's incredible. It's a thing. Traffic cones are quite hazardous in pelotons.
On a bike,
yeah,
traffic cones pose quite a problem.
They do. More than a stray bidden or a prairie dog, usually. So today we hypothesized that we might talk about, I'm going to just throw out a disclaimer. I've had a lot of conversations in the last couple of days. Nathan and I talk a lot. And so we hypothesized a format for today's podcast, or maybe just a loose subject. And we may or may not wander from that subject. But I'm confident that whatever comes out of our mouths will be of interest to this audience. There's a statement. And Nathan came up with a great analogy for cycling the other day.
Well, actually, it was this morning.
Was it?
It was this morning.
It was this morning.
Time
flies.
Time flies.
Tempus fugit.
Yeah, we were riding today, and I've been trying to think about a way to express the kind of randomness of cycling when we look at planning, preparation, and performance, if that's like in a linear line, right? Imagine that's like dot 1, dot 2, and dot 3, and it always goes left to right. That's a kind of maybe traditional way we would look at it, and we like to predict. And as we know, coaching has, well, not coaching, let's just say sports science has become a lot more scientific over the last decade.
They're trying.
Which is great. You know, we are seeing humans do some pretty superhuman things. And maybe it's the optimist in me, or maybe it's naivety, but I do believe that athletes are now producing the performances clean that athletes prior to who were doping were able to do. I think we're actually able to do that now through a whole lot of new science in lots of different fields. You know, faster bikes, better nutrition, psychology,
more aerodynamic skin suits.
Yeah, it's all of these little pieces are coming together, and we're going really, really fast on a bike.
Yep.
But that's all well and good if we can say 1 + 1 = 2.
Right.
But a lot of the time, where either the athlete or the coach or the observer of any of these things is that we see people, they often find something that works once and they try to copy what they did to have that outcome again.
Yep.
And quite often it's different. It's like 1 + 1 = 7 this time. And they go, well, hang on, like, you know, now I'm confused. And one of the things that I think sports science falls into a little bit of a hole or a false reality is that their main focus is actually trying to be able to predict outcomes from a human in terms of physical performance. And that's a nice thing to think that we can do, right? And it would actually be really nice if you could. And maybe for Tadej Pogačar, you can do that. But for the most part...
Who?
Attacked by Tadej Pogačar! But for the most part, that's not exactly how our experience always goes. And, you know, we can come pretty close to predicting certain things, but then we also just have these like black swan events in our lives, whether they're health, whether they're emotional, or whether it's just totally random and you've got no control of different things that you can't even tell if that was the thing that affected you or not. So I've been trying to come up with like a metaphor or an analogy for actually why the science is still really important, because I'm not trying to discount you know, all of these different things that we can kind of do to get better as riders, and, you know, looking at the 1%ers or zooming out, looking at the 50%ers, like, you know, eating enough food. I don't consider nutrition to be one of the 1%ers. It's like, no, that's one of the fundamentals. And then, you know, sleep is one of the fundamentals, and, you know, making sure you stay warm on a cold ride. It's a pretty big one. You know, these aren't like 1%ers. Normatec boots, I'd call them 1%. That's a 1%er. Does it really make much of a difference? Maybe not, but maybe over time it does. Maybe it just feels nice, and sometimes we need some pleasure in our body after all the suffering. Like our thalamus, which is like the bodyguard for all of the nervous system signals coming to our brain, can become pretty overloaded, and maybe it's nice to give him a little time off. Yeah, sorry to repeat myself in saying this. I was trying to come up with an analogy or metaphor for this, and then today all of a sudden it hit me. We rode past a lake and I saw this guy with a pretty nice fishing setup. I'm a big fisherman myself, and I like to invest in the story of being able to predict when you can catch fish. And all of a sudden I had this like aha moment. So bear with me while I try to explain it. You see a lot of fishermen out there, and they've got their boat, you know, they've got their little foot controlled electric motor at the front of their boat, and they can kind of like silently stalk up on areas that might have fish, and they've got 10 different rods rigged up all at once. So each rod has a different lure that can go to different depths, different colors based on the turbidity of the water, the time of day where they're going to kind of be in the shadowy points, or looking for deeper water where the fish are going to be hiding from birds, and
The species of fish.
so
right.
so these are kind of like equipment variables, right?
Yeah.
So this is kind of where like cycling is now with equipment.
Yeah.
There used to just be one bike, and now teams have multiple different bikes. You know, like if you look at Colnago, they've got a pretty crazy range of performance bikes for Tadej and their teammates to use on different days. And then we're looking at rim depths. Now we're looking at tire width. And they've got different skin suits for different temperatures and for barometric pressures. And you know, they've got different electrolyte balances for different temperatures, and even in their gels. You know, bicarb, you're actually now able to have in a gel instead of taking these like dirty pills, or Michael Woods going back and having like a breakfast bowl of bicarb soup. Like that was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. It's like, are you seriously slurping on some bicarb soup mid-Flash Malone or whatever race it was? Amazing athlete, but I thought that was pretty fun. So we've got these kind of like equipment parallels here. So it's like, these are done understanding some kind of universal laws of physics, basically, is the main one here. Also chemistry, biochemistry, neurology to a certain extent. But then we also have the reason for why we're doing this is that we're actually trying to say, like, let's try to use our scientific knowledge to give ourselves a higher percentage chance of victory. Like, let's give ourselves a higher chance for this to lead to what we ultimately want, which is to win a bike race. Fishing has this other thing where they actually start to look at like behavioral things in fish. So barometric pressure, low pressure, that fish tend not to bite. So you have to kind of use maybe like a more enticing bait form that they can't resist, or a type of lure that really pisses the fish off, and maybe they attack it defensively. And then you have to look at wind. So you're actually deciding which part of the lake that you're actually going to fish on based on, the fact that wind on some times of day, if the sun is overhead, wind on top of the water actually creates less visibility into the water. It's better for the fish to actually come up high at that time of day, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all of these different things that fishermen are actually looking at. They look at moon cycles, they look at tide cycles. They look
What a bunch of nerds.
They look at water temperature, they look at water depth, they look at all of these different things. And but at the end of the day, you can have a fisherman like this that's taken in every single factor and account. And they've got an absolutely beautiful cast where they can land their lure in the exact spot that they were thinking about to try to draw a fish out of a hole. And they've got the best equipment. They've got their boat stalking up. It's super quiet. They've done this 100 times. They've realized that the conditions are absolutely perfect for catching a fish that day. And this is how we're going to do it. This is like the plan. But then all of a sudden, they've caught nothing after a full day's fishing. And they see like a little 10-year-old boy on the dock who's literally put a worm on the end of a hook and used like a washer to get it sunk to the bottom of the water. And he's sitting there with like a giant walleye.
Right.
And it's like, what
happened?
Hang on, but I did all of the things right.
Yeah.
And I've been preparing for having all of these things right. And this boy has just outfished me because he just chucked a worm onto like a 20-year-old fishing cane and like probably didn't even use like a good knot. Like he got lucky that nothing snapped off and probably ran the fish off the ground, as opposed to winding it in. It's like, so here's where I find a parallel to cycling, is that this often happens. You can do absolutely every single thing right. Try to predict every single variable to account for it, to do all of these things in a strategy. And it just doesn't work. And you can't understand why, because you're constantly trying to predict the outcome of fishing.
Yeah.
And then there will be a 10-year-old boy who comes out and just catches a fish with a worm. He didn't know what he did. But one of the reasons why we should still strive to do all of the things right is that the likelihood of that boy catching a fish in the same way the next day is lower.
Probably pretty low, yeah.
Is a lower percentage chance than the prepared fisherman that's doing all of the things right, going out the next day and having one of the best days fishing he's ever had. There's a higher likelihood chance of that happening than the boy probably catching that fish in the same way. So why do I care about this analogy? I feel like it's really hard emotionally to deal with failure in cycling when you feel like sometimes you do everything right and it goes so badly. And then there's these other times that you do nothing right and it goes really well.
Or someone else does something, nothing right, seemingly.
And you start to feel
You're
like there's this like,
what is the deal?
There's no justice in this world.
Like
and
they get this unfair gift.
And then finally you do everything right and you get some results or you have some success and you're like, finally, I've cracked the code. I know how to predict this. I know how to create a performance.
Right.
And then all of a sudden the next race, it just goes completely bad. It's really hard to kind of go to bed at night thinking like, oh, I should go out tomorrow and just like get this done. Because sometimes you actually lose faith. You lose belief in yourself.
And it requires effort to do all those things.
A lot of effort.
A lot more effort to use the sonar and gather the lures and all that rather than just put a worm on a hook.
And that person goes to bed the next night and goes, let's go fishing tomorrow. I've got a clear mind. I'm not even thinking about it. I'm a great fisherman.
That was a delicious walleye I had for dinner.
And that's also a psychological benefit to that person, is that they're actually just going to bed thinking they're great. They've got a whole lot of neurochemicals buzzing around in there thinking that they're really good at this and they can kind of get away with not trying harder.
Yep.
But why do we start to try harder? It's because of failure, right? Like if that boy really enjoyed fishing and on that day he didn't catch a single thing and he saw a guy on a boat with all the different rods come in with 20 fish in a bag who'd be like, hey, how did you catch 20 fish? And it's like, well, you know,
sit down for 2 hours
I
and I'll tell
practice
you.
fishing using
Yeah.
these techniques and
Yeah.
these kind of theories. Then maybe the boy will actually start to think to himself, well, maybe I need to prepare myself a little bit better for fishing.
Either that or he'll lose interest.
or he'll lose interest, right? Which is also fine. Like,
Yeah.
you know, everybody's journey through athleticism does not need to lead to the world tour or to the world championships or to be the winner of the tour or the winner of the
Or even to practice sport at a level where you try that hard, we'll say. Right.
You can just keep it fun.
Yes.
It's the right relation to your life is always the key fundamental to.
Mm-hmm.
But if there is that fire inside you that burns, that you want to be better at this, or you enjoy catching a fish, it could be as simple as that. So the parallel there is like, you enjoy winning. It's like, okay, so you're chasing the emotion of winning, and sometimes it just happens without you trying, and sometimes it doesn't happen without you trying, whatever. But the point I'm trying to make is, I find this to be a really nice analogy because it shows a certain level of randomness to outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Fishing has totally random outcomes because you can have every single theory under the sun and you don't even see a fish all day. And then some days you just throw a lure on the side of the boat and, you know, a river monster comes up and bites it. You go, that should never have happened. And
okay, so let me pause you there. Question. Because, okay, I'll play the role of the ultimate rationalist scientist, right? Who is the guy who has all the lures, or the sports scientist who wants to predict all the outcomes.
Yeah.
And I firmly believe...
Or the people that read, that write the fishing magazines to teach that fisherman how to do it.
Exactly. So I believe these people, and I had Sebastian Weber on my podcast, he's in this camp for sure, who believe that it's not that the prepared fishermen didn't catch the giant walleye on that day because of random events. They don't actually believe in the stochasticity of nature. They don't believe in the unpredictability of nature. They just believe they don't have enough complex tools to model it and predict it yet. And that's what the edge of science is for, is to keep learning so you can make more gizmos and more devices and more models to predict what will happen, right? And so that's one possible sort of stance on this paradigm of fishing being like cycling, or of complex nature, the complex nature of cycling as a sport, which is very complex with a lot of variables. So there's some people who are rationalists to the point where they believe like, oh, well, this is just an equation to be solved. And eventually, one day, we'll have all the answers that explain every single performance, even in something as complex as a road race with changing weather conditions, changing tarmac conditions, gradients, descents, hills, climbs, blah, 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 crosswinds, hailstorms, sunshine, and 185 riders that are all of different fitness abilities and different aerodynamic coefficients and riding on different bikes with different wheels and different pressures and tire widths, blah, 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 and different glycogen levels. Like eventually we'll be able to put that all into one unifying theory and we'll be able to predict. Today, there's a 98% chance that guy Tade will win.
Yeah.
Or not, today VDP is going to win, or tomorrow, whatever. Like someone unknown is going to win, right? That you wouldn't predict, and the model will predict that. And they actually believe that that's possible. And then on the other side of the equation, we have people, or the other side of the philosophy rather, we have people who believe that there is an inherent unpredictability to nature. It's like a random number generator, truly. And that random number generator will always allow some percentage, although it might end up being quite small, of elusive outcome to your fishing competition or your fishing day, where you do everything right and you do all the models, and there should be 5 walleye right here in this exact puddle or this exact spot, this shadow, and I should catch them because of this, this, and this, but no walleye. So I don't know what happened, but my model, something escaped my model, or the other side would say, no, nature's just that unpredictable. Like the walleye just were in a bad mood that day and they didn't want to come out, or something that you couldn't account for. And so I think it's important to tease out, maybe we don't know the answer to this, but I think it's important to tease out hypothetically which side of that fence you're on. And I don't mean you specifically, Nathan, but I would like you to answer that question.
Right.
What do you think?
a few things come to my mind to answer that question. One is I have dealt with so much failure in cycling and still had what I perceive to be a very successful career.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of those things in cycling. It's actually it's not like you're necessarily like ever building, but you're accumulating results. You know, it's like results don't necessarily build on top of each other, but by the end of a career, you have accumulated a certain kind of palmares. You know, someone like Simon Gerrans, for example,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at his palmares, you know, winner of Liège, winner of San Remo, Tour de France stages, Giro stages, Vuelta stages, yellow jersey at the Tour, won Down Under 4 times, whatever it is. You'd think to yourself, if you looked at that, you would say, oh my God, he was such a high-level cyclist. He must have been good all the time.
Right.
But actually, that was an accumulation of results over a 14-year career. And I would say,
Percentage-wise, it's super
like
small.
90% of the races Simon Gerrans was in, he wasn't even really a player or a figure.
Yeah.
You know, maybe he was helping his team, you know, doing important stuff, not discounting that it was important work that he was doing. But a lot of the time, you wouldn't have even seen him by the time TV coverage came on. That doesn't discount the fact that he is an absolute beast and historical freak of this sport, right? Like if you look at that palmares, that's a pretty small club that you could say has ever been that good.
Mm-hmm.
But on Simon Gerrans' normal average day, it was actually pretty bad, like compared to his best.
Mm-hmm.
Like the delta between those 2 points, the average and the best, was enormous. So when you sort of say that, we could call that like a standard deviation.
Mm-hmm.
Like that standard deviation is enormous. Someone like Tadek's standard deviation is kind of tiny.
It's been much lower.
Right, there's a really small standard deviation.
Same with Eddie Merckx, right?
Right, and for me, unfortunately, because this is kind of the harder side to actually like deal with and process as an athlete, my standard deviation was enormous. I could have some of the freakiest days on a bike, and then a week later, I would be getting dropped in, you know, the first climb and sitting with the gruppetto, whereas the week before I was, you know, getting third on a mountaintop finish and being like, wow, I'm a good bike rider today. And I wouldn't say that there is not things that you can do to mitigate that kind of swing or that extreme swing within your own deviation, or standard deviation. There's a lot of, and this is where I think a lot of sports science and sports science as well can be put under a banner. If it's done properly, it can be also done very holistically, you know, like sports scientist sort of infers that, you know, it's like, well, if you just sit at 412 watts for your 20-minute effort as opposed to 408, that's the difference. It's like, you know, training is never going to be that simple to say that, you know, we can absolutely produce a performance and an outcome and stop levels of fatigue as soon as we know exactly what your lactate threshold is for this day, and it needs to be 68% of that for this amount of time and 82% of that for this amount of time, and that's going to be what stops you fading the week after.
Yeah.
It's like, no, sports science is actually really complicated, but most people within cycling see it through a scope of like, what data are they producing through their pedals on that particular day? Sports science it looks at, you know, body core temperature. It looks at hormone cycles. It looks at, you know, what are we digesting and what are we creating gas in our belly? You know, it's like these sort of things are actually really multifaceted.
Rate of glycogen repletion during stage races.
Right.
Right.
So it's sports science, I think, sometimes gets a quite robotic view. Depending on which sports scientist you're talking to. If you look at Sebastian Weber, I really like the guy, but I don't think that guy has an imaginative bone in his body, right? Like he's essentially living in a matrix of numbers and figures, trying to find numerical patterns through everything. Whereas some other sports scientists actually try to find more imaginative visual patterns to try to link things from different aspects of an athlete's life, emotions, personality, and actually see if those things might actually be the reason. And I've been fortunate enough to work with people that understood kind of my rhythms, and we kind of made that standard deviation at particular times much smaller, and the swing between my best and my average to take longer to actually kind of swing up or swing down. So to answer your question, like what do I see as... Can you remind me the exact sentence that you had so I can build on that?
Yeah, so really what I was getting at is teasing out the two opposite sides of perspective, or at least that's how I see it, that either you're Sebastian, to use him as an example, and you kind of believe that ultimately the way we will explain not catching the fish or not winning races all the time is just to improve our model, right? And that's what sports science is for, is to model races so that we can predict performances. And those two things are non-trivial. I think that's our next maybe chapter. But the other side of it is just accepting the fact that nature is stochastic inherently. It's unpredictable inherently. It is that you might say God is a novelty generator, right? Meaning the experiences we're having in the natural world that are brought about by all this dance of yin and yang, that will lead to an inherent unpredictability. And that's, you might even say, I'm giving away the side of the fence that I'm on, you might even say that's why we're here, is to have that experience, right?
Right, well, I know where you're going with that.
Yeah.
I'll let you close off where I'm at, because I think big picture, I also see it the way you're about to explain. But to give some context, I guess, to everybody listening, because I think a lot of people like to listen to something and actually have an outcome that they can also think about for themselves or practice for themselves, is I would say that I'm much more on the side that I understand, or at least very much accept, that the randomness of nature, and the randomness of not being able to control all of these things. But that's not to discount the algorithms and being able to try to forecast or predict or increase our chances at something. I'm almost a little bit of a confused soul, you could say, is that I'm very much, someone who perceives energy and tries to kind of live with nature, embracing that randomness and to try to take life lessons from it. But at the same time, I study science. It's like my biggest passion in the whole world. I spend countless hours thinking and reading and doing my own research and also doing my own studies on different things. So you say, can those two things belong together? And I would actually say that, one is art and one is science. But the truth is, there's a lot of science in art. And there's also a lot of art in science. So this grand debate of art versus science is like, well, actually they are so complementary. They're like a knife and a fork. You could eat off a knife, but it's pretty bad. Yeah. But you can also cut with a fork. But it's really good when you got the knife and the fork together. And the fisherman that does everything right enhances his chances of catching a fish. His average over a career, we should call it a palmares like Simon Gerrans, his final outcome of his career is going to be absolutely exceptional like Simon Gerrans, because he's doing everything right to put himself into a place that on the right day, when all of these variations in nature favor him and don't hinder him, he's given himself the best chance to win the bike race or to catch that fish. Whereas the rider that neglects that over a 14-year career isn't building on all of those small elements and learning lessons from each one and actually bundling those experiences so that the central nervous system, next time that they're in the same situation, is prepared to make the right decision because they've reflected on the times that they made the wrong ones. And they also know that they can trust that their body is going to be enduring those moments that they've failed in the past, because now they've worked on those weaknesses. They're going to know that they've given themselves the fastest chance to stay away, solo from the front of a race, because they've optimized their aerodynamics, they've optimized their position, they've optimized their clothing, their cleat position, their hip angle, everything. So I guess it's to say that my philosophy in life is that we call fishing and not catching, because there is still a randomness to it that we will not catch on the day, even if we do absolutely everything right. And cycling is not called winning.
Right.
It's called cycling.
It's called cycling.
We don't call it, we're going to go do some winning this weekend. We say we're going to go racing this weekend.
Right.
And all that we're trying to do is integrate what we can know and what algorithms show a propensity to be correct, because there's no outcome generator in sport that I have found that produces a predictable outcome 100% of the time. So it's to say that I'm not sitting here on this sort of like hippy-dippy side of the fence that, let's discount all of this science, and training with numbers doesn't matter, and all of this, but it's actually to take a bit more of a relaxed approach in doing it. It's like it's putting in all of that effort, but not taking it too seriously, I guess, is my kind of way of saying it. And does the fisherman out there who's trying to do every single thing right still completely enjoy his fishing experience? Or is he missing one of the fundamental things about fishing, which is like, you're in a beautiful place, you're trying to create an outcome, but it's actually the process itself is actually something that we do because we love doing it. So, if we take that also onto the bike, I know a lot of riders, especially in gravel right now, there's some young riders that are like just giving every single thing in their life away to the sport right now. It's quite intense to watch. Yeah. And you think to yourself, like, are you really enjoying this enough in your path or your dream to produce this outcome? Yeah. And will that outcome, if it happens, give you all of that joy? Or is that outcome probably still going to happen if you do everything right, but just sort of take it a little bit more chilled, be a little bit more laid back? And then the question would be, or is it potentially more likely because you're not trying to control everything with such a firm grip? You're trying to control it with a loose hand. And maybe that loose hand is actually the better approach. So where do I sit? I sit somewhere in the middle, embracing the inherent and beautiful relationship between art and science. Yeah.
So, sorry, I just got to wave to this guy that I cut off there. Oh, he doesn't care. Sorry, man. That was inadvertent. Wah! That was the express lane ending rather abruptly.
Scary.
So, a couple things that come to mind for me on this. Thank you for that, Nathan. I agree. I think we should call bike racing or cycling and not winning. We're not going winning, which reminds me, somewhere on one of my shelves I have Johan Berniel's old book, which is titled "We Might As Well Win," which is so telling for so many reasons, right? So maybe Johan,
it has been foretold.
Yeah, I wonder how you did that. There's your sport. There's your model for predict winning. Just make your engine like 20% bigger than everyone else's. It's virtually guaranteed, although not quite, as it turns out. So a couple things that come to mind. So, what are sports scientists trying to do? From my perspective, what they're trying to do is make a model. The human brain is a predictive organ, right? The nervous system is a predictive system. It predicts the future based on past events. That's how you stay alive. If you were roaming around the forest starving and you picked a berry and then you shit yourself for 2 days, you probably wouldn't eat that berry again, right? Or maybe you would, but in very, very small quantities. That might be a strategy. But if one of your tribesmen ate a flower and died, then obviously everyone in the tribe would note that flower might kill you if you ate it. On the other hand, if you got high, then they all might have it. I don't know. I'm not part of that tribe. It probably depends on the philosophy.
Yeah, and you hippies all call that medicine. You're just trying to trip. I know where you guys are at.
It depends on the guidance of the elders. That's what we're getting to. And so
you're saying the wisdom of your drug dealer.
Yeah, that's a modern way to interpret it, yes. And so we're predictive by nature, and so what sports science is trying to do is make a model of a race, right? So we have all these mathematical models. Math is the language of engineering and science, generally speaking, that and really complicated, convoluted English. And So we have these models, and people draw graphs and they use math, and they're like, okay, let's calculate how many kgs you're going to do at this part of the race, or how many watts per kilo you need to make it with the lead group up this climb, blah blah blah. And then we're looking at wind, and we're predicting weather, and we're asking questions like, what's the optimal skin suit based on temperature, pressure, humidity, and wind, or something like that, and the length of the race and what you have to carry. And those are all reasonable things to do. And I would add that what you're doing fundamentally is you're trying to predict how a bike race will go. And this is one of the most beautiful things about bike races, is that we don't know how it will go. And I don't believe it's because the system is so complex that we haven't modeled it yet. I think that it's because it's a natural system and it has inherent random number generators, we might say, built into it. I'm just using that as an expression to sort of illustrate my perspective, which is there's an inherent unpredictability in all things that are natural. It's not because the models don't predict it. It's because that's the way nature is. There's a difference there. And so I believe my instinct and intuition lead me to believe that if you think that we're going to ultimately predict the nature of a bike race down to an algorithm, which is not unlike the idea of a unifying theory, I believe that that's a fool's errand. I think that nature will always find some, maybe perhaps quite finite, but also distinct way of disproving your theory or your model, because that's what nature is. It's the dance, right? Mm-hmm. Always a dance with you. So it's like there's always this play of yin and yang forces. These forces dominate everything in the universe. Light and dark, good and evil, left and right, blah, blah, blah. Flat tires and inflated tires, winning races and losing races. I mean, there's a million ways you can apply that lens or that philosophy to something like cycling or an experience of riding a bike or racing a bike and see how it influences outcomes. And those two forces will ultimately, like, the way this whole thing works, in case you missed the memo, is basically all energy and all events pendulate between those two domains. And at times that pendulum swings really hard one way, and then inevitably it will swing really hard the other way. And when you average it out, it's close to a balance. Mm-hmm. But it depends on the timeline under which you average. That's the key. If you look over 24 hours or a month, you go, oh, the weather's changing. But if we just zoom out to a big enough timeline, things are in balance. That it has to be by definition, right? Until the universe ends, until yin and yang stops. And when yin and yang stops, the pendulum no longer swings, life will cease, because all life energy is based on this basic principle. So maybe I just exploded 57 million universes away from a bike race, but not from my perspective, because this is all the same conversation. And so really, from my perspective, I would first say that I think that if we think we're going to out-science our way into understanding, or we are going to science our way into understanding how every single bike race is won, or how you can win every single bike race, that's a fool's errand. That's not how it works. And then additionally, I would say that, now I just lost my train of thought. Complete derailment and emptiness appeared in my mind.
You are living between yin and yang right now.
Yeah,
the world has stopped.
The world has stopped, and I'm about to die. So if I do, take the wheel.
Take the wheel, Jesus.
It's like in Fight Club when he's like, just let go, right? Just let go. Guys, what were you going to do before you died? Build a house. Paint a self-portrait. Sorry.
We're not supposed to talk about that.
There's our movie quote. Yes, you're not supposed to talk about Fight Club. Let's see, where was I going? I was talking about yin and yang in the dance, and it'll come to me. But I think that when we consider which side of this fence you sit on, right? Maybe you don't know. Maybe you're just listening to us talk about this, and it's the first time you've sort of considered this model from this lens, or this discussion from this lens, we'll say. Maybe you have a different perspective. But I think there's kind of a polarity here. That's how I see it. And when we're on the side of the scientist, when we drill down a couple levels as to what's trying to be accomplished with that modeling, right? The two things I want to point out are, one, the method of, okay, we've had an experience of, I'll just make up sort of a paradigm to explain it from a simple perspective. Let's say you've done 300 bike races, and let's say you're a scientist, and so you have done all the things. You've looked at skin suits and tire pressures and grams of carbs per hour, and you've nerded out on all these models, and you're modeling out the course, and maybe you're a time trial, so it's a relatively simple model in theory, right? So you're looking at time trials, and you're using, whatever software to analyze the course and the wind, and you're kind of calculating what percentage of FTP you should be at for this climb and this stretch and this tailwind section, etc. And what kind of acceleration you should do out of corners. And that's your perspective. What you're trying to do is use past results to predict future results, right? And just like in any FDIC disclaimer, past performance does not guarantee future results. Like, it literally says that. And it's like the movie Pi, where the guy tries to discover the one unifying equation that will solve the market, right? Will allow people to figure out how to make $1 billion instantly on the market. Same idea. It's the same debate. And we have to ask, is the method valid or useful for us to take a bunch of data from past experiences and plug it into a model and average it out, and then apply that average to a future event?
I mean, but also,
why would we assume that method is sound?
Right.
I think it's the default.
Right.
But I would pose the open question. Why do we assume that that's a useful method? I don't think that's a useful method, because I can look at examples in my own career of 100 road races where things went a certain way, and we can pick one variable and look at it. Did you get a flat tire? Did you not? Did you crash? Did you not? And then I can find race number 101 where all that window, everything that suggested that I wasn't going to crash or flat, were untrue, because I both crashed and flatted in the same fucking race. As a simple example, right? But we can even take out the stuff that is allegedly more exterior or exogenous, like tax on the road or, other riders taking you out. We can even look at more internal things that you have a measure of control over, like how many grams of carbs per hour or whatever. And I can still find flaws in the same model, no matter how many past data points we have. So that's the first point. Did you want to comment there?
Yeah, I mean, it would be really hard, I think, to live as like a team sports scientist when,
sure,
like, we're trying to use this predictability model, right? Which is pretty much the case across the board. Imagine you're on a team that's currently like 18th or 19th in the world tour.
Meaning you're about to lose your license potentially.
Like,
right?
There's a lot of pressure on you right now.
Yeah.
Team's doing shit.
Yep.
Some teams seem to be winning everything, and you're sitting there and you're like I should be able to do this, or like, or looking at it, be like, how will I ever close that gap? And it's like, well, I mean, this is the beauty of bike racing, is that there is this like unpredictable thing that sometimes tactics, which is this beautiful thing that is really hard to coach, right? You actually have to coach by being there and talking out situations and having experience and understanding. It's like a guy like that, let's say the Zwift world champion of any year doesn't necessarily go into bike racing with these huge numbers and win, right? So that's already kind of like, there's like your negative hypothesis being tested and being like, oh, hang on, like if we know someone who has world tour level numbers, or winning world tour level numbers, let's put them in a world tour race, and no, there's literally no performance because skills, all these
lots of other things.
Like, so it's like this predictability model. Imagine if you're one of these poor sports scientists on these world tour teams that are at like the bottom of the pecking order, and it's like they must just look at themselves in the mirror and be like Silas from the Da Vinci Code, be like, I'm a bad scientist. I'm a bad scientist. I can't work out. If I can just figure out this algorithm, I can turn a rider that's worth $200,000 into one that can beat Tadek. And it's like, well, you're fucking wrong for a start. Like, if we talk about standard deviations, it's just like, you can make an athlete better by optimizing them, but you're not going to turn a donkey into a racehorse.
Right.
And this is where people kind of have to also look at the mirror themselves.
Be a little realistic.
Realize where they are. And,
Yeah.
and I feel like this would be a really hard place to kind of live. And it's, but it's not to say at any point that studying this stuff to find where we can optimize is not worth doing. But what we can't identify necessarily early on is how an athlete is going to develop over time. Like, I've seen some riders that were never really pegged to be the big rider, and after 6-7 years they hit this like stream of better consistency, and all of a sudden the racing style of that season fits their physiology better, and start making better tactical decisions. And now they also happen to be in a team that they enjoy being in. They have friends, they have people they trust, or all of a sudden they hit this like rich vein of results that, you know, can be just the start of their palmares, or it could be the crowning jewel of their palmares. And inversely, there are some riders that were pegged to be the absolute best of all time early on. There was a young winner of Tour of Utah a long time ago, signed to a World Tour team, I think for the biggest amount of money a Neopro had ever been signed for. He came to the World Tour and he was just never anywhere close to that expectation. And I think, unfortunately, that science predictor model also puts some unfair pressure on this athlete, right?
That's a really non-trivial point. The same thing happens. I've seen athletes who have medaled early as juniors, for example, and they basically get told, "Wow, you're so talented, you're so talented, you're so talented," and it's like a shadow reverse psychology or something. I don't know what the right term is, but
it's like gaslighting.
It's like gaslighting, but maybe not really. Maybe they are quite talented, but they believe. Then every time they fail, they feel like they're not living up to something that they should. It should come easy. It's like they're told they're so talented so often, they have this expectation they're just going to start winning everything, and they have the Midas touch. And so then they have this crisis when they don't win, and then that pressure builds, and then all of a sudden we have a meltdown, and we get this rider who actually probably was quite talented, but they overinflated in their own perspective, or they had, helicopter parents can really amplify this effect, right? It's like, oh,
Correct.
You're going to be the next tour winner or whatever, right?
Or it's like, why is everyone comparing Tadej to Eddie Merckx? It's like, who cares? Like, we are watching one of the greatest champions of all time express himself in real time. It's like, that's so cool. And then we've got Remco doing some crazy cool things. And Vingegaard, it's like, we're in an amazing period of cycling. Who cares how we compare apples to pears? You can't compare them.
You can't.
Why even make the debate? And
you can't.
Why would we even put that pressure on Tadej? Because that's so just not what he's doing this for. Like, he doesn't care about that. But now you're making him think about that, and that's an unfair pressure. It's like, leave the guy's mind open and be just the champion he is. But I think what I'm kind of like taking or interpreting from where we've gone, and most of our chats sort of start in one way, go somewhere else and find a nice conclusion or non-conclusion, or we agree that we can't agree to finding any consensus. But for me, where all of this is actually kind of pointing towards is that this scientific model of always trying to find a better way to predict an outcome, or say that we still just don't have the algorithm yet, is also maybe steeped in a small fallacy again, which is like, this is fishing, this isn't catching. Why do you think that the only successful measure here is the catching? And in cycling, it's only winning, right? Right. And it's like, when that young rider who's told that they're going to be the next insert big champion name here comes in and they don't do that, that's like really bad. That's like failing. Like, you didn't catch a fish today, but actually maybe they were 6 minutes down and managed to make it to the last final climb of a crazy alpine stage. And for a young rider, that's actually quite mind-blowing. Like, maybe their performance actually was the best performance they've ever had, right? And you can actually use science to say, hey, you've never done anything like that before physiologically. And a classic example for me of exactly that was, and the right use, I think, of actually scientific observation or surveillance of an athlete to actually help them deal with a failure.
Mm-hmm.
Amstel Gold in 2017, I was 4th. And on basically the final climb, Gilbert attacked with Michael Kwiatkowski, and it had already been an absolutely insane race. I was the only other rider that was able to follow them. And I got over the top of the climb, but then there was sort of this like false flat with some crosswind, and Gilbert attacked a second time.
Mm-hmm.
And I lost 10 meters, then it was 11 meters, and then it was 12 meters. And then I realized I had to look behind me to the next group.
Yeah.
And I was still really proud of 4th, but it was my entire goal of my career to win Amstel Gold. And you looked at my file and you actually messaged me and you were like, Nathan, do you realize you did your second best ever 1 minute power following that move at the end of 268 kilometers when you were already 7,000 kJs deep into work, and you'd already done 3 efforts at 700 watts for over a minute and this much time over 500 watts for the day? He's like, I don't think you should be too disappointed, because it wasn't that you weren't, it's not that you cracked and you didn't have a good moment. It was just that the best you've ever been wasn't good enough to follow a world-class athlete.
The next 3 guys.
And it actually really put me at ease, because I thought I'd failed in that moment. And you actually pointed out to me, Nathan, you didn't fail. You actually succeeded the best you've ever succeeded. And you had the balls to try to do it. Like, you didn't take the safe option and stay with that group, focus on getting 3rd. You actually were trying to win the bike race.
Yeah.
And for me, I think one of these things about trying to predict an outcome before it's happening is like, well, we're also giving everybody the same standard of what success is. And this is what's really hard in the peloton, or for anyone at any level in cycling, is like, there is only one winner on a day, and that's perceived to be the platinum standard, and then maybe podium is gold standard. You know, top 5 is, okay, silver, top 10. You didn't have a terrible day, but, you know, we're going to say good, but
do better.
And depending on which rider it is, top 10 is, come on, man. Like, that was shit. You paid too much to be top 10. I pay you to win. Or for some riders, top 10 might be, hey, it was nice to see you in the top 10, but, like, you know, next time the lead is there, you better bloody lead out. And it's sort of this, like, strange push and pull all the time about it all. But where I think I would feel more at ease as a sports scientist would actually be using all of these tools that we have from scientific knowledge and empirical testing to say, like, what can actually help in this situation? Will aerodynamics help? Will this help? Will this help? But actually giving everybody just a realistic view of what success is for that day, and actually breaking that down onto an individual rider level basis, given where they are in their form, where we know they can be, they are in their season, what their goals are, etc. And I think we would just take a lot of pressure off a lot of people if we did that. And that pressure, not ironically or non-trivially either, could actually be the very thing that lets them rise to their absolute potential.
Yes.
We could look at it from a spiritual lens, which I'm sure you're about to jump into, but we can also look at it from a neurochemical lens. You know, if we feel like we are failing, if we feel like we're not good enough, if we don't feel like we belong to our tribe, we don't have a purpose, we don't have a mechanism in it, there is a cascade of neurochemicals which will invade and infect your body. It will decrease recovery. Cortisol is the inhibiting factor for all HGH binding to any HGH receptor. Testosterone will go down, estrogen will go up. We become highly volatile to our hormonal imbalances when we are filled with cortisol. And I know there are a lot more complicated mechanisms than just cortisol, but it's also a nice, easy way to kind of use it as a bit of an umbrella, is to say that we are having the wrong brain chemicals. We are not having oxytocin. We are not having serotonin. Like, we start chasing hits of dopamine because it's the only way that we feel like we're not a failure. That's where addictive personalities come in. It's where we start snacking on shit food. So all of a sudden the scientists might be saying, yeah, but tomorrow you've got to go out and do these exact efforts, and we'll get there. We'll get there because we've got a mathematical equation. We're going to hit these points. We're going to get to the checkpoint. We're going to grow from there. But actually, if we were just a little bit more human, and actually a little bit more individual and a little bit more caring of how people feel, we might actually start to change those neurochemicals. We might have neuropathy. We might have, all of a sudden, we've got oxytocin and serotonin streaming through the body. We're going to have less inhibitory chemicals like cortisol going through the blood, which are going to actually increase both neuro adaptiveness and alertness. It's going to make people trust their intuition and decision in moments of stress on the bike. Your actual pain perception will also be less for exactly the same input or output, whichever way we see that. And it's more repeatable, which means that we're actually putting building block on building block on building block, as opposed to just more weight onto the same structure, which is the other way of looking at it. So I think it's a really sad thing to try to actually predict the future just with like an algorithm. Even if it existed, I still don't think it would necessarily work, for the very reason is that we are an emotional species, and that all of these actual physiological events that happen in our body are actually dependent on the emotional connection to what's happening.
Well, you just did go to the spiritual place in a neurochemical way, perhaps, but yeah.
See,
Well
we
said.
see the same thing through two different lenses.
Yes, indeed. As I often say to my wife, we're saying the same thing after we've argued for half an hour. Concur. Yeah, thank you for that. I think what makes my brain tingle next is to ask maybe a deeper question, or go drill in a layer or two, perhaps, from where the science mind is. So we can always ask why, right? And sometimes that has utility, and sometimes it's just mental masturbation, we'll say. But we can always ask why, and sometimes it can offer a different perspective. And so when we consider this default mode network of the scientific model, which is to say that we are trying to be predictive about the future, and you give the example of a world tour, a scientist who worked for a world tour team who's 18th or 19th on the ladder, and they're stressed about losing their status as a world tour team, perhaps stressed about losing their job, and they're looking for a solution. And so they're modeling things, and they're asking the question, why are my riders not going better? How do we find that level? I mean, that's the nature of sport, right? That's the ultimate question of sport, is how do we go faster? That's the point. And when we use a predictive model, what we're doing, I would argue to some degree, what we're doing is we're trying to, you might say, defeat or control or eliminate the unpredictability of the natural order, the natural experience of racing and of life. And so,
which is actually a pretty cool thing to try to do, right? Like, it would be really nice to be able to predict those things or control some of the things.
Would it? I don't know, because I think that's what I'm getting at. I think the origin of this mentality is actually much more nefarious, and there's an undercurrent of that in society, which is, I mean, look right now, we're driving in a car and it's got air conditioning. And some of this is our own creation, right? Like cars are solar magnifiers. They tend to harness solar energy, and they become little hot boxes. So you've got to put AC in your car. And for anybody who's ever driven anywhere in the summer without AC, like, unless you drive with the windows open the whole time, you're pretty miserable if it's hot out, right? And it's the same thing with electricity and wanting to see things at night. When you go camping, you don't stay up much past sunset because light is harder to come by. And so you go to sleep. And so you're more dictated by natural rhythms. But there's a part of man that wants to defy that. There's a part of man that wants to control that. And that part of man is often rooted in science. And that part of man often believes that nature is trying to kill you. Now, I want to be crystal clear. Nature is trying to kill you. That is the dance of yin and yang. Like, there is a thing that's an over romanticization of nature, where it's like, I'm going to go on a hike and I'm going to be happy all the time and sing with the birds and hug a tree. And dude, I'm a hippie, I like, this is my jam. I spend a lot of time in nature, but I'm also well aware of the fact that nature is trying to kill us. There are ticks, right, that carry diseases. There are mosquitoes that carry diseases. There are rattlesnakes and bears and mountain lions in Colorado that want to eat you.
I mean, I'm from Australia, Colby.
You're from the land of things that want to kill you, literally. I mean, when I was there, Steve Hogg was telling me about it. He's like, if you see a huntsman spider, a fucking spider, he was like, literally run. That's what he told me.
No, funnel web.
Funnel web.
Funnel web.
Ah, okay. I got the name wrong, but anyway, probably would have died because I couldn't identify the thing anyway. I probably just ran from every spider. And then you guys have the drop bears. I mean, those things are terrifying. And so, right out of a tree, man, just drop on your head and gnaw your brains right through your skull. So, nature does want to kill you.
I mean, that blue belly waffle snake.
The cycle of nature is that things die and decay and they become food for other things, right? That's your destiny. That's everyone's destiny. We are all mushroom food, right? We are all the same organic decaying matter. And so that's just the end result. And there's a part of man, there's a part of like Dave Asprey who desperately wants to fight that, or all these tech people who want to like upload their consciousness to a supercomputer. Like, are you fucking kidding me? And as if consciousness is what makes you. That's not what makes you you. But there's a part of man that wants to defy this and fight it or control it or kill it, right? Or air condition it or cover it with concrete or cover it with Walmarts and have, whatever, at any given moment, Starbucks and refreshing water on demand. God forbid we be uncomfortable for more than a few minutes. I mean, you and I were talking earlier this week about
these massive sippy cups.
Massive, like 36-ounce plastic Nalgene bottles of...
It's like, what if I get thirsty? Yeah. I will die.
I will die immediately.
I will literally die if I get thirsty for more than 20 minutes at any point. I will die.
Because we've all seen on Instagram 94 million times about how the negative impacts of dehydration. And I think those posts have good intent, because there certainly are people who have had health compromises because of their dehydrated state, right? And we can over-index on shit, just like we do with everything. So I would offer that the scientist who desperately, you might say, even wants to model athletic performance to try to conquer this mystery code, to some degree, they're not living in harmony with nature because they fear nature. In my opinion, a lot of this attempt to model and assign a mathematical value to everything, I see a lot of an undercurrent or a lot of fear rooted in this mindset. The mindset is that nature's going to kill me unless I solve it or figure it out or armor myself against it, right? And there's endless fiction written about this. I remember an old show, what was it called? The Twilight Zone. Remember that show?
Mm-hmm.
And there's one about a guy who lives in a perfect apartment, and it's got like white walls and white floors, and he's got these little cameras everywhere, and he sees a single spider and he runs out and kills it, and immediately, and that's the thing. And then we have, a fly, and he runs out and sees it on the camera and runs out and kills it. And then of course it's Twilight Zone, so inevitably more and more insects appear, and then they take over the whole house, and he freaks out and gets probably eaten by insects or something. I don't remember the end of it, but the point is, it was this sort of fool's errand to battle against nature. And we have the same battle in my house. A lot of spiders in my house, a lot of centipedes, I mean, our house is old, so they're like, dude, I lived here before you did. What are you doing?
Even this like hippie guy living in your house.
He's cool. That guy's cool. Be cool, honey buddy. We're gonna be like a couple Fonzies up in here. And he's like, dude, I'm just a spider. So, yeah, I think there's an undercurrent of fear, which maybe sounds like a stretch. I probably haven't made my case very clear, but I don't want to talk too much around it either. Like, I really believe that's the case. I think people try to control nature.
Are they scared to surrender to...
Certainly. That's part of it.
To the fact that anything can happen at any time in general?
It's about control. Uncontrollable things are scary. They'll kill you.
Because they can't.
Yeah. But wake the fuck up, people. Like, you're going to die. Like, let go. Let go.
As you said, no one's getting out of this one alive.
No one's getting out of this alive. I hate to say that. And I will acknowledge that I have probably an unusually brutal perspective on that because my parents died when I was young. So one of the gifts from that experience, which may sound super twisted, to someone who hasn't heard me talk about it before, one of the gifts is that I learned a very important lesson about life at a very young age, which is everything dies, which is really not actually so sad. It's more what we learn from the I Ching, the Book of Changes, which teaches us that the only constant is actually change, right? People say the two things you can depend on are death and taxes. Taxes are actually a thing you signed up for, believe it or not. You agreed to that. And you can unagree to it, which I have not done, but it is possible. But there's no one getting out of this thing alive.
Well, for cyclists, they just moved to Monaco.
Or previously Andorra, although that's maybe changing, right? But like, that's a thing. Death and change. These are the constants of life. So it's amazing if you take a step back and watch other people's conversations and just make a mental note of how much people talk about change. Like, oh man, the weather's so different than when I was a kid, or bike races are so much faster than they used to be, which is one I've been hearing for 25 years, by the way, which is not untrue. It doesn't make it untrue. Like, things get faster. That's the point of sport. But people sometimes talk about it as though it's a thing they didn't expect. Like, well, let's think about this logically for a minute. Aren't bike racers supposed to get faster? Like, I hope racers are going faster than they were when I was racing at the age of 25. Like, shit, man. We're riding around on 19 millimeter road tires, pumped 120 PSI for starters. You know, our
guys were wearing parachutes for jerseys.
Literal parachutes. Like, my hour record photo, you look at the equipment I was on, by far, the slowest piece of equipment I have is my skin suit. They were like garbage bags in comparison to today. So I hope, I also hope that, you know, records fall. Like, that's the point. That's the point. People set records and then other people go faster. That's the advancement of sport. And that should and could happen forever. The paradox being that you'll never get to zero. No one will ever run a 0-minute mile, not in physical form, right? I suppose it's possible someone could run 1 mile in a second, but I don't think I'll be alive to see that one. But as you approach zero, it probably, you know, of course, it gets harder and harder to do.
Yeah, rate of diminishing return.
Exact. So I think that's more or less my point, is there's an undercurrent of fear in battling nature, and that undercurrent of fear leads to a culture, an enculturation scientifically of attempting to control nature. Well, because you don't want to die of lung cancer, so we're going to grow fake lungs. You don't want to die of, you know, heart disease, so we're going to invent new drugs and invent new ways to scan arteries and veins.
There's two ways in which you can approach fear. One is a lot easier than the other. The hardest one is to accept it, right? So it's like, you know, if we fear a race or a religion, it's, in some ways, it's the harder option is actually to learn about it and try to see what similarities you have. Try to understand the differences. Try to actually accept the thing that you may be feared. The easier thing to do is to try to dominate it.
Yeah.
Which is historically what humans have done over and over and over again, which is highly nefarious, which I think joins your argument. And that is to say that, you know, if sports scientists, their only goal is to dominate this nature that we keep talking about, which is the random number generator. How do we dominate that? It's like, I agree with you. I find that to be nefarious by its very core and definition. However, there are some beautiful examples of science. Like, let's look at the zip wheel, the wave wheel, the shape. Where was that found? That was found from an animal. When we look at these swimsuits in the pool, the actual texture of the fabric is modeled off a dolphin or one of these species that can actually move really fast through water. It's rough in one direction, smooth in the other. Also, like, if we accept nature and the random number generator, we can also learn from it, because we can find things that are closer to predictable in nature. Not always,
Sure.
But we can work with nature, and I think that is the finest expression of what I would call like a holistic view of sports science. Is that there's a lot of amazing things that we can do to, if we link it back to the fishing, increase our probability of catching a fish. But we will never always catch a fish.
Yeah.
Then it would be called catching, and it's not the point.
Right.
And sports science can consistently help us in getting a higher probability of doing a good performance or a better performance or our best performance.
Yeah.
But it will never guarantee a win.
Yeah. And one more important point to maybe acknowledge before we dive off. We were having this conversation earlier, Nathan, about how we were making a joke like, oh, hey, what's your position in cycling? Well, I'm one of the guys that's paid to ride around and get beat by Tade.
Yeah, I was like hoping to make a meme about it.
Right.
Anyone out there wants to make a really great meme, just to be like, hey, so what's your job in your team? Oh, I'm just another one of the guys Tadej has to beat.
Right.
It's what an honor.
The point being, though, think about the inverse of that as a thought experiment. If there's no peloton, right, and there's no guys for Tade to beat, so to speak, then we have a random dude riding around in France all by himself. And that has no meaning. So the point I'm making is that there's a beautiful paradox in sport, which is, as you pointed out earlier, Nathan, like there's so much emphasis on winning and there's so much focus on winning. And of course, to some degree, that is sport. That's the point of why you're there to some degree. We can also do as we talked about with you in Amstel Gold and point out that although you crossed the line in fourth place, you performed at arguably the best you've ever performed, or within the top 0.1%.
I was at the top of my standard deviation.
Right. So you have to be happy with that performance on that day, even if you get beat by 3 other guys, because it's like, well, I showed up to the race ultimately to do the best performance I could, and I have to be happy with that. That's just the reality of sports. Sometimes you do everything right, you perform better than you ever have, you set PRs, and still you get beat. And it's like, okay, that's why I'm here, is to have that experience. That's what I signed up for. And if you sign up for sport only to win, and that's the only acceptable condition for you, you're a fucking child. Like, you're a child throwing a temper tantrum, is my take. You can't handle being beat. And that's a 7-year-old mentality. You never progressed past the first chakra, most likely, in that particular arena of your life. You might be a master of other things, and that would commonly be the case. But if you can't handle not winning, then first of all, cycling is the wrong sport for you, because even Eddie Merckx, the winningest cyclist of all time statistically, was about 30% of the races he entered, he won, which is a massive, massive margin. I don't know what the next...
like, if you look at a baseball team, if you only win 30% of your games, you're at the
done.
bottom of your ladder.
Exactly, right, because it's binary. It's like in baseball, you either win or lose, right? Correct. But in cycling, it's way worse than binary odds, because you're lining up with 180 other people, or maybe even 80 other people, right? Even in a points race, you've got 1 in 24.
Well, first of all, there's teams, and then there's individuals.
Right. So I think all I'm saying is, yes, there's an emphasis on winning, and this is the paradox, right? But also, we'll say, it is necessary for a peloton to exist, because that's what defines Tade or whoever's winning the race, right? Whoever crosses the line first. When Remco won the Olympic road race, if there was no peloton, he still would have won a gold medal, but it would have been really weird to just watch him ride around by himself for whatever it was, 190K or something, in the streets of Paris, and then cross the line and be like, woohoo, I won. Because the point of competition is to best someone else. And everyone else who raced that day also had their experience of the Olympic road race, whatever that was, good, bad, or otherwise. And that's why they were there. So this is the dance, right? There's always a dance. This relationship of yin and yang, and we're here to express our athletic potential if we've chosen to do that in cycling.
But can I add a cliff note or side note?
A PS?
Or footnote.
Footnote, a postscript?
Is that's by no means saying Tadej only cares about winning. Actually, I find him to be one of the most curious winners of all time. because I don't see a desperation. You know, when Jonas beat him at the Tour de France on an uphill sprint last year, that 99 times out of 100, which kind of also goes into what we're trying to say here, Tadej wins that.
Yep.
Like a small sprint at the end of a climb when they're both together, Tadej wins every time.
Yeah.
He didn't.
Except that time.
And he goes up to Jonas and he said to him along the lines of, man, that was amazing. You smashed me. In a happy way, because he was there because he likes the competition. He wasn't there because he necessarily just likes the winning. He likes the trying to win. And that day he went, whoa, I couldn't beat you. That was cool.
Yeah.
And Jonas looked at him like, how do I beat this guy mentally?
Yeah.
Like, he can't be beaten. And there's also a little bit of a thing to think about there. It's like, if you can't beat someone, how do you beat them? Even when you beat them.
Did you beat them? Yeah.
So yeah, like I think Tadej's a curious winner because he is the most prolific winner of this generation. But also, you know, in the recent Dauphiné, he decided not to chase the final stage, even though it was really within his ability to do so. You know, his confidence wants his 100th victory to be at the Tour de France, which is pretty cool to be able to say, I'll just win it at the Tour. But there's not this. That also shows something in Tadej, is to say that he's not just there to win.
Yeah.
He's there to kind of have a different kind of experience than just winning. It's quite phenomenal.
Yeah.
But yeah, I totally agree with you on that front. It's
Yeah, good point about Tadej. I agree. He's an interesting athlete psychologically to look at. He strikes me as a bit different than most other winners. And reading into it a little, not having watched a ton of like Tadej interviews or whatever, like I don't nerd out on that stuff too much, but just watching him as much as I have, I would say in general, we could make a statement that perhaps Tadej doesn't fit this mold, but in general, we can make a statement that when someone is a multi-time Tour de France champion, or the type of person who owns, you know, a 6-car garage filled with a Porsche, a Lambo, you know, a Rolls, blah, blah, blah. Lambo. Or they own 6 businesses, or they, whatever, you know, they're highly, highly accomplished. I would say that the norm, the dominant paradigm by far, is that these people are extremely driven. And unfortunately, most of the time, the origin of that drive is unresolved trauma. That's typical. I mean, we want to use a really basic archetypal example. Look at Lance. Like, really pissed off at his dad, went out and smashed every other man on the planet Earth repeatedly in different forms, as a bully, as a doper, as an asshole, you know, probably multiple other examples I don't know about. And he's still doing it to this day. To what I can tell, he really hasn't changed much. So that's maybe a little disappointing. But that's who he is. He's like, really, you're for me or against me, and most of you are against me because you're other men, and men are dicks because my dad was a dick. And I never quite grew out of that phase. This is my Pop 101 psychology analysis of Lance, which may or may not be accurate, to be fair. But we've got a lot of Lance out there, so there's a lot of data points. And the point I'm making is, you know, this is an example of someone who had a traumatic experience in their young life, and it put them in this cauldron state, you might say, and that gave them a lot of fire, and that fire came out in a way of, in his case, extreme accomplishment to the point where a drive that was so strong that it disregarded all barriers of morality, right? And he lied and bullied people and cheated and did all the things that we know he did now that he's admitted to. And then later he still recants, basically, still like, I still won 7 tours. It's like, okay, cool. And so that's Lance's outcome. And I think that's the normal outcome of someone who performs at that level. And where I think Tadej breaks the mold is, I don't think he has that fire created from a cauldron of trauma. It doesn't seem that way.
I feel like he races like a child.
Agreed.
Having unbound play.
Yeah.
And he's just playing on the bike.
Yeah.
And he loves racing for the fact that he gets to just experience this rush of emotions and competitive nature. It's like, hey kid, go run to that soccer post as fast as you can and I'll time you. Okay, let's
go.
It's like, you know,
Yeah.
when you tell a young kid to do that,
Mhm.
they do it because they just want to do it. That's fantastic. And that's one of the reasons why I'm just like, I have to say it, I'm a massive Tadek fan. And I'm not ashamed to say it. I think what he's doing is so fascinating because I've never seen anybody in all of my time in cycling at any level approach it like this. And what makes it equally crazy is it's at the top level.
How much he's winning,
Yeah.
and how much he smashes everybody. It's really quite interesting. Yeah, I would say most top sportsmen are either in the Lance category or maybe the Bernardino category, which is, I don't think Bernard was born out of a cauldron of a lot of trauma, from what I can tell. I don't know his personal history super well, but he obviously was a prolific winner. But I think there's at least a minimum sort of a hard stamp of you only have self-worth if you just grind yourself into oblivion every day of your life. Like this old school in the US would be like an East Coast, like if you don't get up at 5:30 and start working all day,
If you haven't
you're
already
soft.
10x'd it by 7,
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
a failure.
You're a failure, exactly.
What do you mean you don't have passive income working for you?
And also make more money. And what's wrong with you, you know?
What, you haven't ice bath today yet?
Why are you sitting down? Yeah, exactly. All those things.
I turned 24 hours into 24 different days.
So there's one of those two models, and really one is just a subset of the other. Effectively, the like you only have self-worth if you smash yourself into oblivion every day. Old school Eric Wahlberg work ethic, that is just a fraction away from, like, you add that to a little bit of trauma and you get Lance, right? Those two go together perfectly. It's almost like justification for more work. So there's that. If you masquerade it with a nice veneer of East Coast politeness, you get Tyler. Anyway, sorry. I'll stop at the 101. But
You've had more time to think about this than me.
a little bit, yeah. A little bit, perhaps. Wait, are you calling me old? I think you just called me old. That's cool. I am pretty old. So I think that was a lot of talking. That was a lot of words. Let's be done with this thing.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening, people.
Yeah, I'm sorry if there was no real conclusion or point made at the end, but
I think we made some
I
conclusions.
think if you babbled along with us, I think there's some cool stuff there.
Maybe. Hopefully you consider the ramblings to be useful or insightful or thought-provoking.
Anyway, let's go get hooked on cycling.
Yeah. Let's go race some boats. Some steamboats.
Oh yeah, Steamboat.
Steamboat. Wait, do you want to just give everybody your 60-second take on the race this weekend? Sunday
Steamboat
race?
race?
120 miles, 3 laps on a 40-mile circuit for you?
Yeah, I think it's a real shame that the course has had to evolve to this. I think it's fantastic that they have still brought the event to fruition, knowing that there's been huge issues with some heat from the locals. I'm surprised by it. I always thought that this race actually was a wonderful thing, and for what it's worth, like, I don't know how many locals are actually impacted because we're out in the middle of like nowhere.
Yeah.
But that's not my place to say anything or get involved with. We don't want to go to a race and make anyone feel annoyed or disrespected or affected. So we're in a different location this year, which means that the course cannot be as cool, not be as epic, and also not be as hard. So now we're doing like 3 laps of basically like a champagne gravel road circuit.
But the racers make the race, not the course.
Correct. But I also always love single track and doing some like technical things in a bike race and gravel. So to me, it's a little bit sad that we don't get that, but I also appreciate that, Amy and the whole SBT crew is just doing their, as always and always will do, their absolute best to give us an awesome race weekend. So I'm super stoked to be racing it. And it's going to be my last time racing Steamboat as someone who's actually trying to win the bike race. So there's pretty big reason as to why I came here. It's my last year racing full time, and Colorado has been a really, really special place in my career. It's left a lot of a big impact, and I've taken away a lot of memories and relationships from here. So I just wanted to do it one last time, take the good, bad, or the ugly with how the result goes. I'm here to actually just enjoy it and see just how hard I can go and how deep into the race I can go with the best. And always hold on to that little flame of flickering light of maybe if I can be there in the end, I can beat them in a sprint. So here we go, Steamboat. Let's go.
Let's go, 2025. Thanks for listening, everyone. We appreciate your patronage. And as always, think critically, pedal consciously, and act intuitively. Be well.
Attention, well dippers. Did you know that I offer a unique service at my studio in Boulder, Colorado? An integrative fitting is the culmination of my experience and understanding that helps an athlete have a deeper insight into their relationship to cycling and movement. This is understood in the context of how the dream, goal, or objective aligns the client's choices and habits. The psyche, the environment, and drive will all influence the current expression of athletic ability. As we understand these factors, we can shape and direct athletic potential. What this means in a practical sense is that we spend about 6 hours working together, including a short or outdoor ride. I will film you on and off the bike, and we will discuss an extensive intake questionnaire. You will leave the fitting with a unique perspective on your function and with actionable pathways to improve your performance. This service was created specifically to help cyclists who have been through various fitting sessions and have had unsuccessful or unsatisfactory results. We dig deeper to find more meaningful outcomes. If you are interested in knowing more about an integrative fitting, please visit my website, colbypierce.com, where you can book an appointment. Epilogue. I want to share a few brief thoughts about the inception of cycling in alignment. The purpose of this podcast is for me to get 3.5 decades of hard-fought lessons out of my skull. Some of them through my own research and reading. Some of them I've been taught through mentors and colleagues, other riders, other racers. A lot of it, a massive amount of it, was simply trial and error through my own stubborn methods. And that has amassed a certain amount of experience and knowledge, understanding. And while I think I'm reasonably smart and I know quite a bit of stuff, I want to make it clear that the opinions that I share on this podcast are belief systems built on what I've experienced to this point. And that some of those opinions are pretty strong, but they are also loosely held. That is to say that if I learn more about a topic and have a greater level of clarity or understanding, then my old belief systems will be abandoned and I will now operate under that newfound knowledge. So I'm not here to tell people all the things that I know. I'm here to explain what I've learned to this point. And there's a big difference. Also, that is the intent when I discuss things on the pod with guests, is to learn from them and have a discourse. Because if we can't have a discourse as adults, then we've lost one of the basic tenets of modern society. Even if we disagree, we ought to be able to, in most cases, shake hands and walk away. Because after all, this is sport we're talking about, and while sport is training for life, it's nothing to get too upset over. The purpose of the podcast is to help me help other people, and specifically to help them actualize their highest potential by illuminating a path that enables alignment with their truth, their intent, and their coherence. That's really the end goal. So I'm grateful for your listening. My intent is also not, to be clear, to gain an audience or become popular or gain social status in any way. I don't care about that stuff. That said, if you feel an episode that you have heard will help someone you know, please share it with them. That helps us reach the end goal, which is to help more people. Thank you for listening. I'm grateful for your time and attention. Blessings.